Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. In last night's Sunday address, we talked about the necessity of African leaders to cut their dependence on the money of their enemies. Today, we're going to discuss our own. By now, everyone's heard about Donald Trump's proposed massive cuts to Section 8 and that he wants to turn the system basically into a grant-based program where the individual states would be given the money and they could decide what they wanted to do with it. Now, while you've had a bunch of people, especially on the white left, who have been oh so concerned about this, the reaction from black people by and large has been uniformly positive. And that's largely because of the fact that we've seen how these programs have given rise to and encouraged a lot of dysfunction within the community. And the reason for that is, when you have somebody who's your enemy who's pretending to be doing you a favor, that puts your natural survival instincts to sleep. It makes it where instead of you trying to make sure that you get your strength up so you can overthrow your oppressor, instead you're trying to make nice with them because you're quote-unquote getting something out of it. And while it's true that it's only a small number of black people who have become dependent on these government programs, the reality happens to be a small number of people is all it takes to undermine the solidarity and the activities of the whole. By now, I'm sure you've heard of the so-called Pareto principle. It's basically a saying that 80% of outcomes is the result of 20% of factors. But when you apply these dynamics to a group that does not have the power in the society, an oppressed minority, you don't need 20% of them in order to cause major problems. 10% or less will be more than enough. The reason that this happened is because white supremacy found a way to make its evil perpetual, and that's by making it profitable. The way that anti-black racism would become both a means to an end and an end unto itself is that it would become lucrative. When something is financially enriching, it also becomes highly self-justifying and self-reinforcing as well. So they can make dysfunction and then make money off of it too. Whole economies have been built around this evil system. Banks, real estate interests, grocery stores, construction companies. There's a whole lot of folks who got their hands in the till of all that government money that's coming from all of these poor dysfunctional people. Hell, even Amazon is advertising that they give discounts to EBT recipients. But I'm sure Jeff Bezos is just doing that because he doesn't want any of those poor deprived people to miss out on Prime. These are the real welfare kings and queens, but they're not black, so there's no one who's going to call them on it. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, but don't look for him to do any investigative series about which corporations all that government assistance money winds up in. And while there have been the predictable YouTube shorts, Instagram videos, and of course the avalanche of TikTok videos showing a bunch of people getting money from the government and now all of them terrified that the apocalypse is about to drop, it's also true that there's been a lot of black folks who have been saying, you know what, this is just what the doctor ordered. These government programs were originally set up to help white women. They didn't have black people in mind at all. But when they were finally made to have to include black people in it, what they did was they decided, okay, but we're going to go ahead and do it in such a way that it's going to become a weapon that actually causes dysfunction rather than tries to address it. And before I get the usual suspects who are going to be wagging their fingers at me and telling me that I don't understand what it's like in the struggle, let me tell you something. People encounter tough times. That's a reality. And here's another reality. When white power creates something, they don't do it to do you any favors. Black poverty is engineered into the American social order. Do you truly believe that the same people who created our problems also were going to come along and give us the solution too? As the victims of the American government, we can't afford to let the enemy pay for our housing. We can't afford to be beholden to or dependent on the very people who are trying to take us under. Next to taking one's health, the second most devastating thing that someone can take from you is shelter. That's why the marauding white mobs of the turn of the 20th century destroyed black homes during those genocidal attacks on black townships. And in a number of cases, the homes that didn't burn down, well, those same white marauders would move into them themselves. The government would let them. And speaking of governments, later on, people like Robert Moses made it a point to weaponize infrastructure projects like highways and deliberately plan to run them right through black neighborhoods and enclaves. This was done to eliminate anywhere for black people to live. There's always been a war on black housing in this country, because when you reduce people to nothing more than nomads, if they don't have the ability to settle down, they also don't have the ability to stabilize. On subjects like this, people have got to understand there's a reason why there are black people who say, hey, there's too many people on things like Section 8 to begin with. It's damaged the culture. And as I pointed out, these programs have been used as Trojan horses to act like they're here to help black people when in reality, they were meant to undermine black families and ultimately to leave a huge number of black people open to precisely this kind of rug pull. And let's be honest with ourselves. If it wasn't this, it would have been something else. I posted a morning briefing last year about the evictions that were going on and how it was primarily black women who were being targeted by this, and we're hearing the same thing this year. This was during the Biden administration when all that was going on. So if people are going to be indignant about the mass eviction wave that they know is coming, I hope they also save some outrage for what was allowed to happen during Biden's term too. I certainly can't see where Section 8 has empowered black people, but that's not to say Trump's changing things in order to do us any favors. Remember, he's not getting rid of the program altogether. He's just changing how it operates. And you can bet he's looking and wondering how can you have Jared Kushner cut in for a piece of the action. When I hear him saying that he's going to allow each individual state to do what they want, a lot of black folks say, well, it's okay because there's a majority of red states in America, but let's keep in mind, these guys are the first ones to be siphoning off money for all of their little inbred pals. That's where all that federal money's ultimately going to wind up at. It reminds me of how the USDA allowed their assistance programs to farmers to be controlled by so-called local boards, which were all white and chaired by individuals who are completely and thoroughly antagonistic toward black farmers. Now, a number of people have been saying that with the reduction in Section 8, that would also mean that a number of these slumlords are about to go belly up. I have absolutely no tears to shed for that group, especially when you consider that a lot of them intentionally decided to allow their rentals to become flea traps. But just because a number of those parasites may be about to go extinct doesn't mean that this is going to translate into some sort of bounty of new homes for black people. Remember, fewer black Americans own a home than white Americans, and that gap is 46% to 74%, which is worse than it was in the 1960s when housing discrimination was still legal. And that speaks volumes about how effective the so-called first black president and Asian vice president have been in bridging any sort of economic divides that we face. Democrats and their shills and suck-ups need to get that through their heads. This is why Kamala Harris's black support cratered. It wasn't because black voters were swinging towards Trump. It was because black voters stopped trying to fool themselves into believing that voting for Democrats would actually translate into any sort of beneficial policies. We saw Democrat enclaves like Chicago and New York deliberately diverting millions of dollars in black taxpayer funds to make sure that illegal aliens got a roof over their heads, money to make a down payment on a home, and used all their local resources to help people who were in the country illegally, intentionally overlooking and bypassing black residents who have been here all along. And then the anti-black racism that these same immigrants brought with them. And a number of those same individuals have been allowed to access those same government programs, whether they're in the country legally or not. Democrats love that kind of thing, and I've explained to you why that is. I'm not trying to throw cold water on the shrinking or the reconfiguration of Section 8, but I am trying to say that black people have a bad habit of getting happy when there's nothing to get happy about. We can justifiably be disapproving of how these alleged social safety nets have been used as nets to ensnare us, and for the most part has turned into nothing more than a massive subsidies program for the most willfully dysfunctional and willfully disempowered amongst us, people who are at the bottom and apparently like it there. And while I'm sure that there's many genuinely needy people who are going to wind up caught up in this thing, the reality is that there have been black people for decades who have been saying, do not allow yourselves to become dependent on these kind of programs precisely because of this kind of eventuality. If it wasn't this, I can assure you, it would have been something else. Remember, the first big welfare cut started under a Democrat, Bill Clinton. Remember? I simply feel the same way about this Section 8 development as I feel about everything else that the Orange Man has said he's going to do. I'll believe it when I actually see it. The problem is that the people who have been making money off of these programs still want that money, and there's no substitutes being set up for that. As black people, we have to make sure not to start talking grateful for things. We have a bad habit of showing gratitude to people who aren't even thinking about us. We can talk about whether this or that policy will be unintentionally beneficial to us, but if someone's not directly trying to benefit us, then it makes no sense for us to be giving them direct praise. What's going on here could very well have some indirect benefit, and that's fine. But if you're going to be ending Section 8, it's ultimately meaningless unless you deal with the endemic poverty that made people turn to those programs in the first place. Nothing that's going on right now is going to help the racial housing gap, not that it's meant to. And that's my point. If you want to celebrate this latest development, that's fine. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. What I am saying is, if you're going to be optimistic, I recommend being guardedly optimistic. Housing is at the very core of a lot of America, especially the so-called American dream. Housing happens to be the core of the so-called cost of living crisis as well, so this issue strikes at more than just whether or not taxpayers should be made to foot the bill for non-working people to have a roof over their heads, and for how long. Even if this does turn out to be an ultimately beneficial turn of events, it still isn't complete until there are follow-up policies that truly address the issues we've been having with housing. Speaking of which, a man's home is his castle, but let's not kid ourselves. Where black people are concerned, that castle is always under siege. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Christy Brown, James Stiles, Gregory Franklin, Stephen Mayfield, and James Porter. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.